Hello and thanks for stopping by. This is Smash TV for the NES, released by Acclaim in 1991. This game is basically a game show, and it's set in a dystopian future of 1999. You're in this game show, and your goal is to shoot your way to fame and fortune. This is a straight-up arcade grind experience, and in the arcade it was a quarter eater. The NES version, luckily, doesn't take quarters. The goal of this game is pretty simple. You run into a room, and you shoot everything that comes at you. You have unlimited ammunition, and there are power-ups that you can pick up as the level progresses. This was an arcade staple for many years, and the cabinet in the arcade worked off of 2 joysticks per player. One joystick would control your movement, and the other one would shoot your gun in a direction. These controls worked really well, but the NES doesn't have controllers with 2 joysticks, so they had to do some arranging for this game, which actually results in basically some different game types. You can play 1 or 2 player, and you can choose to play with 1 joystick or 2, which would be a total potentially of 4 joysticks per game if you were playing 2 player. You would need a 4-player adapter to make this joystick combo work with 2 players, and I also imagine you need to consider the joysticks you're using as well. Now I have a retro USB AVS, and this has 4 controller ports built in, so maybe I could get this to work, but using 2 gamepads is a little awkward. You do have to hold them sideways when you're playing, and you gotta hold them next to each other. It works, but it's not really what the arcade experience was like. But I do have an NES Advantage joystick controller. Maybe getting a second one would help me too. Basically, I think this would be the closest to the arcade arrangement. I'm using 1 regular controller and 1 NES Advantage controller. The NES controller does make the game easier controlling your gun. You can sort of swirl it around. Although you have to turn the controllers 90% in your grip when you're playing them. It's a little awkward, but it works. Now, barring an abundance of controllers, of course, you can use just 1 controller, but you have to use the A and B buttons instead. Okay, the A button fires, but the B button will freeze and shoot in the last direction you fired until you release it. Which means if you're playing with 1 controller, you're going to be rolling your thumbs across the 2 buttons a lot as you try to reposition your aim. And it's going to be slower than if you were using a spare controller, so it'll make it more difficult to dodge at the same time. Well, it is what it is. You'll figure out the way you want to play it anyway. This game is not story-driven. It's just waves and waves of chaos, room after room. When you beat a room, you select your path onto the next room. You always can't go in 4 directions, but usually you can go in 1 or 2. Ultimately, the goal is to get to the end of the entire level and find whatever crazy boss is at the end, and then gun it down. This is actually one of those games you're probably going to find more fun if you're playing with a friend. Having double offense is useful, and it really helps when things start to get crazy. You always have a standard shot and offense, which is useful enough, but you can pick up other weapon upgrades as you go. They are not permanent, and there aren't a ton of variations, but they all do seem to work just fine. You can get grenades. They're fun. It's a bunch of grenades getting shot out of your gun for a while. That's great. There's also this spinning disc type of a shield that spins around you, and it'll cut down whatever walks close to you. You can get rockets too, and those go through everything. But unfortunately, you can't store any one of these guns. Basically, when you pick them up, you're going to use that until you run out. There are a handful of different enemies as well. The majority of enemies early on in the game are just these men that come running out at you en masse, and they have clubs. Logically, this is kind of funny to me, because you have a gun with unlimited ammunition, and the men that are running on screen to get you only have clubs. I'm not sure how or why they would choose this particular line of work, but there it is. There are also occasionally men in turrets at the end of the room, and you can just gun them down. They take a little longer, but they're there. You're going to have also robotic balls that enter the room, and they sort of roll around, then they shake and explode into shrapnel. And then there are going to be increasingly different robot types in the game. There'll be ones that just walk in, and there's a bunch of them in a mass that try to get you. Plus, they're going to be bosses. There are also going to be circular robots that come into the room. It's just, they get a pretty good variety in here, and it's something that I appreciate. The first boss you get to on the first level is Mutoid Man, and it's this big, huge guy that's part robot. Shoot him until he's dead. It just takes a while. There are 3 main stages in this game, and the map layouts are all a little different. When you beat a room, like I said, you can choose the next room you go to. When you see a map early in the stage, it's probably useful to pay attention to its shape, or maybe even write it down, so you know the best way to try to make your way to the end. You want to be able to progress quickly because it's dangerous being out there. There are always multiple ways to make it to the end of a stage. Overall, I have to say they did a pretty good job bringing this port from the arcade. I mean, it's not exact, and it definitely runs into some of the limits of the NES, but overall I think they did a pretty good job with it. It's definitely brainless, but it's clearly Smash TV, and it is fun to race around and shoot things. The colors are definitely bland compared to the arcade, but this happened a lot with NES games. The colors will just feel off. Obviously, programmers had to work with whatever colors were available for the system, but I still find myself wondering about some of their particular choices. I remember the arcade having lots of blue and grays, but here we start out mostly orange. I don't know, I guess you work with what you have. The game does have some digitized voice, which was a selling point for the arcade game. It's nice to see they try to pull that in here to the NES. It works. It was definitely one of the most identifiable parts of the arcade, I think. The music is pretty good here too. I mean, it's not constant, but when you get it, it's alright. The game came out for a bunch of different systems. There were a bunch of different versions of this. There was a Smash TV and the Super Nintendo, though I think that was maybe Super Smash TV. And there was also a version on the PlayStation as well. And I think that one actually might be worth tracking down. I'll have to keep an eye out. Well, that's all I have today for Smash TV for the NES. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you on another video.